Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Suz MacCormac, and I'm very pleased to be here from San Francisco. Go Giants, if there are any San Francisco folks in the audience. I am a partner at a large law firm. We do have the name of MoFo, and I've been hearing a lot today about branding, and all law firms are something and something and something, and they're all white men who've been dead for about 100 years. But at least the white men in my firm came up with the shortened version called MoFo, and we do call ourselves MoFo. So I am a partner at MoFo. And I have been there about 20 years, believe it or not. I was saying 15, and I realized I've been saying 15 for 5 years, so I've had to upgrade to 20. And I have to say, I have been here for most of the day today. And the one thing that is very, very clear to me is that designers and lawyers are speaking, thinking, and acting in a very, very different way. Because when Phil was up here and he was talking about the hill that he has in his organization and how that brought people together, I have to admit that I really fully didn't understand it. When we had Karen up here and she was talking about Series A financings, I got that, but that was really about it. And it was fascinating to me that we were all working together as part of the business community and really speaking a different language. So why should you all, as designers, speaking a different language, thinking creatively? I'm sure you all took arts classes in college. I did math and economics, and my senior year I did a little bit of religion just to broaden it out. So, why should you all understand? I think it was fascinating for me, and I honestly think that all corporate lawyers and all lawyers should learn more about design and design thinking. Why should you learn a little bit about corporate law? And that's what I'm going to focus on today in 3 specific areas. Before I start, they asked me to give a little bit of my background and why I'm here. As I mentioned, I started about 20 years ago, and I really, as a corporate lawyer, I don't go in the courtroom. I have 3 young sons. They would say I spend all my time talking on the phone. But generally, my job is to facilitate the structure of corporations and facilitate the movement of money for corporations. That's what I do. I draft documents, I negotiate, I put things together and structure them. And that's what I did. I came out of law school. I went straight to a big firm in New York, met a boy, moved out to California. I really enjoyed it. I was an econ major, and I like structuring and doing deals, and I still do. I'm one of the few corporate lawyers who's actually happy being a corporate lawyer. And what happened a little more than, and that was about 13 years ago in the Valley, about 2001, is that the economy completely tanked. So I had made partner early at my big, lofty law firm. I was doing deals for all the big boys. We represent Apple, represent Intel, represent UPS, and all of a sudden in the Valley, the work almost completely dried up, especially if you were doing financings or M&A as I was doing. And because the work dried up, I actually went home and spent some time with my still husband. I was going to say then husband, still husband. And 2 things happened then. First of all, I got pregnant. I won't go into that. Second of all, I actually started hanging out with him. He is a creative thinker. He was at Oracle early on. He is a software developer, still is, and had gotten very into environmental sustainability and became a park steward. And for years, I joked that I made money while he did good. But I started hanging out more with him and hanging out with these Birkenstock-wearing, tree-hugging people from Berkeley who were coming over to the Presidio, restoring it. If you don't know the Presidio National Park in San Francisco, it's a fabulous former Army base that has been converted into this incredible national park where now we sold all our belongings and we live. You can tell I kind of went down the sustainability path. And I started hanging out with him. I got it. I was an econ major, the mispricing of natural resources and climate change, and I believed it in my soul, and I still believed it in my soul. And I went back to my day job at the office and started putting it together. Really, the only thing I know besides swimming and maybe a little bit of mothering is corporate law. And I started thinking, how is the design of the corporation yielding this kind of behavior? How does the design of a corporation give us the results of BP or give us corporations that aren't able to at a broad scale deal with issues like climate change? And I became fascinated in this, and this was about 2001 and 2002. And so I started playing around the edges with corporate form and looking at the rules by which corporations are governed and how they can impact decision making. So that is what led to sort of the lead up to me, which is I got very involved in a movement. It eventually became what's called the Public Benefit Corporation in Delaware. It's now the Social Purpose Corporation in California. And really what it is looking in a new way at how corporations do different things. So I want to go back to my initial questions. Why do you as designers, why should you care about this? Really, when I looked through the register of everybody who was coming, almost all of you, actually I couldn't find, except for a few students, almost all of you work for some corporate entity. That is within the confines of that corporate entity that you do your design work. And how many of you have sat back and thought about how the design, how the rules by which that corporation operates impact what you do every day? How many of you? Quite a few. Excellent. Okay, so I was first going to answer the question, but you probably know this. Why? Why aren't you creative, wonderful minds doing this outside of the corporate construct? There are really two primary reasons why somebody chooses a corporate structure. Number one, it shields you from liability. If you were developing these products, if you were developing these designs and selling them to third parties, if you didn't have a corporate entity, people could sue you individually. That's usually reason number one. And reason number two is it allows you to take capital to scale. So unless you want to stay very, very small, having some sort of corporate form allows other people to invest in you, and it gives a series of rules by which you manage the relationship with the investors. And so corporate law for about 100 years really didn't change or evolve that much, other than at the margins. I mean, lawyers like me get very excited about sort of what happened post-Revlon and M&A, but I'm not going to go into that. Generally, corporate law didn't change a lot for about 100 years. But what is very exciting is for about the past 15 or 20 years, it has been changing. In the last several years, it's been changing very rapidly. And so just quickly, I wanted to go through for you to introduce kind of three ways that you guys can think about how you are working in your organization and how you could affect change in your organization that could change your jobs as design, could enable you to look at design and be able to function in design in a different way. And those three ways, I'm going to first quickly go through corporate form. The second is how you raise capital. And the third is how you report, how you hold yourself out to the rest of the world. And I think I sent these slides to the organizers, and they thought I was going to go through in great detail, and they thought that that might overwhelm the audience. And I think they're exactly right, because this overwhelms most corporate lawyers, and I care about this more than anything other than my children. When Karin was up here talking about passion, if any of you wants to have a conversation with me about corporate form, I get very, very excited about it. But don't worry, it's only going to be like a minute or two on corporate form and a minute or two on each of these. And then I get to have Jordan Breslow come up with me and talk about really how these work and how effective they can be as tools for you in the design world. So first, in terms of the corporate form, it used to be on one end you had the nonprofit. The nonprofit, you're taking philanthropic dollars, people are making donations, you can't give people returns, and you have a mission focus first. You actually have a duty, what's called a fiduciary duty, to the mission first. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have sort of the corporation. The corporation, you can have a mission. There is a myth, and again, the Birkenstock-wearing crowd, that you can't have a corporation, a traditional corporation with a mission. You can, but the primary fiduciary duty is to the shareholders and to generating a return. And there are other versions. There are, limited partnership, limited liability companies. But really what is exciting and what you can go back and talk to your organizations about is over the last couple years, there are 3 different forms that have emerged. And those forms in various degrees allow you as a corporate entity to have different rules by which you play. There is the L3C. That is if you are mission first, you might want to consider that entity. If you are a version of a nonprofit, but you really want to avail yourselves of more mainstream capital. There is the PBC and the SPC, the Public Benefit Corporation, and the Social Purpose Corporation, and then there are the benefit corporations. People sometimes refer to these as B Corps. It's just that the B Corp guy is like, B Corp is like good housekeeping seal of approval or lead. It is not a corporate form. Those guys are great at marketing and branding because there are actually 3 distinct forms. And really what they do is they allow you to go to your shareholders and agree a different set of rules by which you can operate. You can agree that your design mission can have an equal weight to shareholder profitability. And so they can actually change. And when these things grow up and mature and go public, this is a viable entity that changed the rules. In my world, why I get so excited about this could change the whole BP. If BP was one of these entities and shareholders had demanded that there be an equal fiduciary duty to environmental safety, the oil spill would have never happened. And so this is why I get so excited about it. It can be a real game changer. I'm going too long. So I knew I would. Debt and equity instruments, just know that when you are raising money, if you are a nonprofit, there are means of using things like green bonds. If you are a small company that doesn't want to scale, but remember with crowdfunding, you can only raise about $1 million a year. I'm just giving you a little free legal advice. So crowdfunding is a good option. DPOs, if you don't want to scale and you want to stay local, there are new means of raising money. And I just wanted to highlight traditional debt and equity instruments. Just know that most lawyers aren't aware of them, but there are ways to blend in mission. There are ways to make sure how you are raising money is done in a way that stays true to your mission. And if you ever want to talk about it, I get excited about that too. And finally, accountability. And we lawyers use the word accountability. You guys can think about your message to your customers, your message to the rest of the world. There is information that you are legally required to disclose, particularly if you're a public company. And then there is information that you may disclose. And know that in this space, what is being required to be disclosed, particularly around environmental sustainability and social and design, is changing. Because more and more people are understanding that design and that treatment of employees actually matters, is material to operations. So it needs to be disclosed. And then there's also a lot more voluntary disclosure. And all of this area, in corporate forms, I describe it as it's kind of, corporate form is almost like in kindergarten or first grade. This area of law is really in its infancy. We're back in preschool. There's a lot of experimentation, but just know that there are options that you have and how you present and how you interact legally with the world in your disclosure. So I teach a course on this at Berkeley, and I think I did just get through the whole class that takes a semester in less than 5 minutes. I would like to invite up Jordan Breslow, and while he's coming up, give him a little bit of an introduction. First, Jordan Breslow was my co-teacher at the class that I taught at Berkeley, and he is the yin to my yang. He is trendy. I am Talbot's. He used to be in private practice. He's also a lawyer. He's just more creative than I am. He was very successful in private practice. There are a series of companies in the Valley where he was the GC and he took them public that most of you may have heard of. Everyone in the Valley has. I met him when he had left that because he needed to have more mission. He went and worked and was the GC of an impact investor called New Island Capital. And New Island was really one of the first and has been the cutting edge in the middle category that I talked about in really thinking about how they can use, they have a couple $2 billion that they manage, how then they can use that money in a different way to further impact. And he is now the general counsel of Etsy, which all of you probably have heard of in the design world. And Etsy, in fact, is one of the 2014 National Design Award winners that he is quite proud of. And so I would love for Jordan to come up, and I think Jean is going to come back and ask us some questions.
Well, I'm here because two lawyers cannot be left alone on stage without supervision on the part of someone. So, you know, I have to say, this is just so fascinating to me. I mean, I'm a business school professor, and all of this stuff about all these alternative corporate forms is really nothing that we've ever talked about. And so I'm wondering, Jordan, it sounds like you've been very involved in this. What do you think about these forms? Do they really hold the kind of potential for allowing us to have whole new possibilities for corporate purpose that they seem to?
No.
No, damn.
Thank you very much.
I knew it was too easy.
Yes. Well, I absolutely think the potential of a new form of corporation is enormous, but to take a slightly different perspective on it, I also think many of the existing corporate forms they also have that potential if they can be used purposefully, so to speak. So maybe I'm not being particularly clear, but I'm not going to talk a lot about Etsy, but a little bit. Etsy is a regular old corporation. We're not one of the newer forms of corporation. Maybe someday we will be, but we're not right now. But we're very mission focused. All of our decisions are based on values. We take our constituencies into account every bit as much as shareholders, if not more. I shouldn't have said that. And we can do all of those things within the confines of normal corporate law. So there's a misunderstanding perhaps that you can't do those things unless you're a new form of corporation. The flip side, though, is we only do it by choice. And when I'm on the other side, as I have been in the past as an investor or recommending investments, I want to make sure that I want a way to force the company to stay true to its mission. Investors in impact companies and in cutting-edge companies, social mission, social enterprises, investors worry that they're going to slip away from their mission. They're going to yield to the pressures of the market and of the next investor or something. And in the traditional corporate form, that can certainly happen. We could just decide tomorrow to abandon mission and go straight out for profits. In the newer forms, as an investor, you take much greater comfort knowing that it's built into the charter. There are constraints and obligations imposed on the directors to make those decisions in a way that supports the constituencies. So,
and if I could just add two things, I agree. So you can, all of you who work for normal C corporations, there is actually a lot more potential to do with mission and with design within that corporate structure. And I think that the main reasons, there's sort of two reasons that it doesn't happen more now. The first is, I was fascinated that John Fullerton, who I think the world of, is going to speak tomorrow and talk to you about design of capital markets. And one of the things he's going to say is that this drive for returns at all cost, the fact that you want to put your money in retirement and get 11, 12, 13% is really one of the things that is sort of killing our whole society. For all kinds of reasons, but he'll talk about that. So once you have a founder, you have somebody who formed a company, they're really excited and passionate about mission, they get investors in, they're not nefarious, but they want to drive as much returns for their investors, and so that will erode over time the mission. The second reason, and why I got so excited and involved in restructuring the form, is that there are a lot of other elements that exist which lead to very, very short-term focus on shareholder profitability. And the two major ones are quarterly reporting, that your public companies have to go out and tell the street. Apple has to go out and tell Intuit on a quarterly basis. And everybody, it's an easy thing to evaluate. How is your company doing today? Well, my stock price was 20% up. Well, of course, then everybody thinks you're doing well. And so the stock price has become this conduit. Short-term stock price has become a conduit for expressing how a company is doing. And the second, quite frankly, is executive compensation. When most of your compensation from your top employees is based on options, which is based on share price. You want the share price to go up so that you can have the money to send your kids to college. It's not nefarious, but it drives, and that's why I became so excited about seeing if we could change the rules by which all companies operate.
So it would seem to me there'd be different ways to think of this. One is if I'm an entrepreneur, maybe one of the opportunities that I have is when I go to the venture capital firms, I try and find one who's interested in providing funding, but allowing me to do so under these alternative methods. Would that be kind of one way to think about using this?
Yes, I think it will take a little bit of time before the venture community fully embraces this corporate form. So, not this job, not the one before, but the one before that, I worked for a company called LoudCloud, and it was founded by Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen, and they've gone on to become sort of pop stars in the investing world. And I know Mark is quite adamantly opposed to this form of a corporation. Yeah. And it sort of takes the view that either you're for profits or you're doing something good, but you can't do both at the same time. As in many things Mark says, I disagree about 100%. But I think he does represent perhaps the overwhelming tide of the VC community. What is this wacky thing? And I'm not interested in hippie investments. show me a real business.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, we're getting a.
Well, and on the investment side, I just want to say why I mentioned the middle slide is because I agree with you. I mean, I get very excited about corporate forms. In fact, you know, I can tell you about every company that is set up under these forms in Delaware and California to date. They're more than, you know, they're more than 100, but still it's a fraction of the companies. And so why I wanted to emphasize the fact that you can use mainstream debt and equity instruments to blend in mission. And some of my clients are letting me experiment, and I'm getting them through the mainstream, but I can tell you by just having elements of mission in there, which is very, very exciting to me. So it's not it's an incremental change as opposed to an overhaul. I still think we need to get to the overhaul, but unless John Fullerton can change the capital markets, we're not there yet.
Well, we're getting an interesting question from the audience, and they're bringing in this idea of crowdfunding now. You know, such a hot topic. We're all talking about crowdfunding and interested in that. How does, in a legal sense, does that kind of fit in here as you look at it?
Do you hate crowdfunding, Suz?
Yes.
Okay, I thought you'd say that. Lawyers pretty much hate crowdfunding.
Do they?
Well.
But then again, lawyers hate a lot of stuff, so you know.
This is true.
We're not designers.
Yeah.
You know, sorry.
I mean, we're sort of trained to look at risk. It's, you know, very exciting, makes us fun at parties. Is that your second cocktail?
Yeah.
So the concern lawyers tend to have about crowdfunding is the level of risk to the investor. So there's not a lot of disclosure along the lines that you would have for a mainstream investor. So there's just a concern that people will be sort of gullibly drawn to make an investment in a company without particularly understanding whether or not it's a profitable enterprise or having the skills to make that analysis. So that it's really at the heart of it is there's a concern that people will lose money unexpectedly. That said, there's so many gaps in our capital funding system. I mean, Suz lives in a strata of the world a lot of times where there's ample money, and she's matching money and need. But there's so many gaps, and at the startup level and at the social enterprise level, we have to look at alternative ways to raise money. And crowdfunding is interesting and quite.
Can I just respond practically? If you want to have a startup, what you have to know about crowdfunding is you are significantly constrained to $1 million in the amount you can raise in any given year. You have to use a registered portal, so you just can't go to all your friends and say, hey, invest in me. You have to go through something that is the equivalent of a broker-dealer, and it will impact your ability. This is not like sort of good or bad, but it will impact your ability to scale. So you just need to know that and make those decisions. In terms of grants are fabulous. Grants are non-dilutive financing. There's not enough philanthropic dollars to make up for the funding gap that Jordan was talking about.
Now, is there anything that would stop you from crowdsourcing for your first $1 million and then going somewhere else for your next $1 million?
You have the cat and dog issue. It's sort of the disclosure issue. I mean, yes, it will make it more difficult for you to get mainstream financing. Not impossible, but more difficult.
Yeah, the follow-on investors are going to be concerned that you have 800 other shareholders or some large number of shareholders, and they tend not to like that. They want to be like one of 3 or 4 investors, and they're concerned about the communications that are required to that many shareholders, and so I think it will be a bit of a challenge.
And it significantly impacts. We didn't talk about exits because I only had 3 slides, but just remember, when people invest in you as a company, certain types of investors at some point want their money back, which means you have to figure out what you're going to do with the company. You're going to take it public, or you're going to sell it. There are other alternatives. Crowdfunding significantly hampers your ability to do either of those things.
Okay, interesting. Well, here's another quite different question I think that's fascinating. Do these new forms that we're talking about make it attractive at all for corporations to account for negative externalities? And of course, we know that certainly we have a tragedy of the commons operating in organizations, right? It's always in your individual self-interest to overgraze the commons. And when the commons dies, everyone loses, but in the short term, we have an incentive to overgraze. So are these new forms likely to help us by really forcing us to take into account some of those seemingly free but actually very costly for the larger commons externalities?
suppose?
I would say yes, and this is where I have to distinguish between forms. If you'll bear with me, the reason the slide was up there, you have the PBC and the SBC. The public benefit and the social purpose corporation, those, if the shareholders enter into a contract with management, and if the shareholders say, you have got to emphasize environmental externalities, you have a fiduciary duty that is equal to value, and you can be sued for it. If you are a benefit corporation in any of the other states, that is one of a laundry list of things that you have to do as a company. And I think it's just a question, which is better is a question of what the company's function is and how it operates. But it's not even that it's more attractive. You will have a duty to, which is why it would solve the BP problem. Mm-hmm. Jordan?
No, I quite agree. Ultimately, what needs to happen is for that to be a mandate for all corporations of all forms. Yes. And someday, perhaps the SEC will come to that view. I know Suz is involved in an organization, SASB, which is moving in the direction of requiring reporting about sustainability and environmental impacts and that sort of thing of any public corporation. And that's really the longer term, I think, answer.
So when we look at things like the carbon tax, and I mean, in some ways, that's an ability to reach into the system and adjust, which is kind of more of an outside in, I guess. And in some ways, what you're talking about with these new forms is reform that kind of is an inside out.
Inside out, exactly. You have sort of, if you look at it, you have three tenets of what. And I used to be a Republican. I'm from rural North Carolina. I always can't believe I'm starting with this. You have to have regulation. The government has got to have some job because you don't have another mechanism. So you've got regulation, then you've got private sector, and whether we like it or not, why I talk about corporate law to people who don't know anything about corporate law is we all work for corporations. Everybody should know some basic bit of corporate law because that's where you work. That determines how everything's run. So you've got corporate law, and then you have the capital markets. And what John Fullerton, I'm hoping, is going to talk about tomorrow, I'm sure he is we're going to have all three. The carbon tax would be part of a capital market solution because what the corporate form won't do is solve the mispricing of natural resource issue, which it goes to your comments. I mean, it's just water is not priced. Carbon is, well, they're sort of priced, but they're not priced adequately. They don't reflect the actual cost to society for what we're doing.
Exactly. Well, I'm just struck by, I think you guys have a PR problem. So there's actually lawyers out there doing this great work kind of secretly. There
are not a lot of them.
Not a lot of them.
Very secretly.
Maybe if you had some designers, they could help you sex up the work you're doing.
I was told once, that it's because I sort of work and I do this this is my passion on the side in addition to my deals, and I really the B Lab, everybody's heard of a B Corp because those B Labs guys are great marketers, but they don't know the rest of this, which is why I feel like you're giving me a platform to educate people up there.
Exactly. So what else?
We do need some designers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe something with the hair would be good. Yeah.
All right, so what haven't you told us then about B Corps or any of these that we should take away? Maybe as investors, we've talked about from the point of view of as entrepreneurs when we're looking at options for business. Mm-hmm. How about investors as we make our own personal millions and figure out what to do with them?
I guess I would say as an investor that there is not uniformity among the states and the statutes. And California has a flavor, Delaware has a different flavor. How many states have them now? I don't know, 13, 14, something like 19. That. 19, so it's something like 13 or 14. Mm-hmm. And the differences, the nuances matter. In some of them, the reporting obligations differ. In some, there is a requirement of an external sort of impact-focused board member. In others, there's not. In some, there are restrictions on the ability for the corporation to be bought or to buy other companies. And all of those things, they sound like they're down in the weeds, but they matter. And I think it would be helpful at some point, once this sort of settles out with a little bit of time, and we need more people like Suz talking about and teaching about the sort of force ranking of all these different forms, because they're not all created equally, I would say. And some, if you're looking, as Suz mentioned, people, when they invest, often as amateur investors, we don't remember the notion of an exit. So you have to get some way to get your money back. And some of these corporate forms will lend themselves more readily to an exit, by which we mean the company will get bought or it'll go public. Those are typically the exits. And others not as much so. So it takes a little bit of diligence, I suppose.
It is, though, as a small investor, I mean, I have to say, do we really believe it in the traditional C Corp fashion that we really get the full disclosure of information to us that others get in their...
That's why I talked about the accountability point, because there really are three flavors of this. There's the form, there's how you take money in, and then there's how you report out. And so if you guys are investing even in the public markets, I think you can start looking for and asking for information. It is much more readily available. As Jordan mentioned, because I didn't want to dwell on too many details, there is a movement to require public companies to provide the kind of information around environmental sustainability, around social factors that is not there before. I think look for it, demand it, ask for it. Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Okay, and I was going to say
But
something.
we can edit.
I'm not going to
mistakenly
advocate for it,
erase
but if you are investing in the private side, you're going to consider these forms. If you're investing in a fund, you have an investment manager, ask your investment advisor these questions. Ask him what information he has about this. Not just the forms, but how normal corporations are looking at this issue. And I'm just going to say that I won't advocate it but there are mechanisms for shareholders to get together and effect change by requesting that the board consider resolutions. I would never advocate for you guys to do that, but you certainly should consider it.
Right. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. Who would have believed that we could have such a fascinating discussion on the subject of law?
I wouldn't.
That's right. But